Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder, it's time to have a look at another developer Q&A, or answers from the developers from, of course, the War Thunder producer BVVD, or as his name is, Vyacheslav Bulanikov, which I hope is correct. Anyway, so this time we have a bunch of questions about all different aspects of the game. Now, one thing that we've seen from the past to developers stuff, and also from the dev Q&A stuff, is that there's been a big push on trying to answer questions from each part of the game, which should definitely be thanked for. Sometimes there is definitely a lot of people out there who believe there is preferential treatment when it comes to specific things getting noticed compared to others when it comes to specific game modes. So to see more of a unified look at every part of the game when it comes to these Q&As and when it comes to past developer stuff is so much better, in my opinion, instead of just focusing on smaller, slighter parts. So, let's get started. The first one is about armored vehicles, which is ground forces, and then we'll get into aviation. So, the first part is regarding American tank shells. Can you tell us anything about the current reports and issues? For example, the T33 performance and muzzle velocity. Will you consider adding the missing T50E1 round for the T32, T32E1, as it has been suggested for quite some time? And the answer is, we are looking at such questions, but with the proviso that we don't want and don't plan to implement into the game the parameters of shell durability, at least for regular composite shells. And about known bug reports, we can say the following. Implementation of the T50E1 shell, even though the ballistics are generally close to or similar to the ballistics of the T41 shell, this particular shell will use another, more durable alloy. As mentioned above, we don't want to implement shells parameters which is related to durability characteristics. The T33 shell. The fixes for the shell are planned and will be done. We will revisit its initial speed as well as the slope effect parameters for AP shells. So, if you don't know what the T50E1 shell is, there is a great little a bug report from Misery Index 556, and the basic way that he describes it as the M82 was to be improved by increasing the size of the driving band. This was scrapped, and it was decided to construct the shell from a different type of steel, which was 98V65, and change the heat treatment process. The new shell was designated T50. He cannot find any information on the filler size, and so on and so forth. So, pretty much, the difference between the shell in the game and the one which is talked about here is a different type of steel and a different heat treatment process, which is of course going to change the properties of the shell. The question is, would you want to put those properties into the formulae that already exist for these shells? And Gaijin have said that they don't want to. To be honest, I think probably because it would be incredibly overcomplicated and you'd have to do everything on a case-by-case basis. One of the things that, to make sense, well, not to make sense of everything, but to try and put stuff on an equal platform, is that they have been using the Damar formulae and also the Lanzodamat formulae to be able to try and put all the shells on an equal playing field when it comes to at least their testing and their penetration values. So throwing in more constants, throwing in more factors will once again change that dynamic when it comes to being able to put things on the same level. So that definitely could be an issue. It also might just be extra work they're unwilling to do since they're happy with the implementation right now. One of the things that is definitely gonna have to be looked at though, and I think it was an incredible surprise to me that the T32 and the T32E1 both went up in BR, especially with the repair costs that they have right now. The T32 went up to 7.3, the T32 T32E1 went up to 7.7. Now, the only way I could justify something like an E1 being at 7.7 is if it got a drastically better penetrating round on it to make it so it was at least equivalent in force to the M103 when it comes to its round. Because the M103 does everything better than the T32E1 right now, apart from maybe upper glacial armor. So for me, it's a little bit odd that they've put these up and not changed any of the shells alongside it, but it may be one of these stagger step processes where they do one change, then they do the next change for it, then they do the next change for it, unlike something like the AMX13, where they put up its BR and also put up its repair cost without putting it in the official notes. So make sure if you are using the AMX13 75, which is the 631 I believe, they've massively increased its repair cost, so watch out for that if you're looking to use it. But I can understand their position on this. They have said in the past that they balance vehicles not just on a variety of factors, one of them being the ammunition choices of the vehicles themselves. So they're just basically staying true to that fact. The next question is, does anti-spall liner affect work for those tanks which had it in real life? The answer is yes, it works, though at the moment we do not have vehicles with anti-spall liners. Post-war Soviet tanks have radiation liners that work similar to anti-spall, but only for the tiniest shards. Radiation liner in the game stops the weaker shards from the fragmentation cone, therefore in effect decreasing after penetration effect. So my guess is this is going to be a mechanic which is going to be used more going forward, since we are going to go more into the modern age, and obviously adding in more vehicles with anti-spall liners. If you don't know what spall is, I thought I'd just show the Wikipedia definition, just because it's simple. So the spall are flakes of a material that are broken off a larger solid body and can be produced by a variety of mechanisms, including projectile impact, corrosion, weathering, cavitation, or excessive rolling pressure. And the example given is this aluminium plate spalling. So you can see the this little sphere here, which is probably a bullet or a projectile, we'll just call it, hits the aluminium wall or aluminium plate, and you can see the spread from it. This would be seen as, the spall, or whatever you would like to call it. Or the spalling of the actual projectile itself. Now, in game, as it says, there are ways to at least reduce the impact of spalling, but not in the form of an anti-spall liner. I'm sure as we go forward, we'll see more. It'll be one of those mechanics which will be incredibly infuriating or incredibly incredibly nice, depending on what side of the train track you sat on. If you're on the side where you have the anti-spall liner and it saves your life, obviously you're going to be very happy. If you're on the other side and you get a beautiful shot and then, oh, I didn't do enough post-pen damage, you're going to be annoyed, especially if you're firing Sabo. The next question is, are you planning to make the automatic loader a damageable module? It is quite extensive and fragile. Let's make it that its damage will decrease the reload time. The answer is it is not planned for now, but we are not ruling out implementation by analogy with ship elevators. It just needs some time. So they use ship elevators as an analogy for this, and basically I think the idea is they want to maybe add in some kind of mechanic like that, where if the part of the model is hurt in some way, or if it's damaged in some way, therefore the module is going to be slower, or the reload is going to be slower, because right now that's not really how it works in ground forces at all. And one of the things that we've seen is a lot of instances in War Thunder where mechanics which used to be binary, so 0 or 1, you're either dead or alive, you either shoot or you don't shoot, or you either get a destroyed modification or you don't, stuff like this, they've become a lot more grey area-y over the years, and I think this is good because it shows that they're getting more precise with their implementation of stuff. If you have a look at crew skills and stuff like that, especially with regards to spotting and things, I would love to get somebody on Gaijin on to talk about how the spotting stuff works, because it was changed either the last update or the update before, and I'm pretty sure it has to do with keen vision, and absolute detection, but I'm not fully sure. I would have to test it more, but it seems to be they've linked that to some of the crew skills. So you can see that as these mechanics get more expansive, as they get more precise, but also more grey area-y, they're going to have less 0 or 1 instances, which will either annoy the player or which will get rid of the gradual idea of what you're working towards. So therefore, for me, taking that idea of trying to improve the grey area of this system instead of trying to make it binary, I think if your autoloader is hurt, like in the form of, let's say, a Lorraine 40T with its revolver autoloader, if that is like orange or something, maybe it should be a little bit, slower. Just like if a loader is orange, you are going to load your gun a little bit slower. That to me would make a lot of sense. It would also mean you would need to define auto-loading systems such as like the Type 91 a little bit more, but you can do that, over time. And also, what do you do with assisted loaders? So the IS-7 is an assisted loader. It's got a ammo rack at the back that, the 2 loaders pop the 2-stage ammo on, and then the 2-stage ammo falls into the gun breech, and then it's fired from the assisted loading system. So what do you do if that system gets hurt? I mean, it's not really going to happen without you exploding a lot, but what if there is situations where it does? So I would like to see if a module is damaged, it doesn't work at full efficiency. We see this with every other module, e.g. transmission, horizontal turret drive, engine, and breech. So to be consistent, why not do it with the automatic systems as well? Otherwise, you are not, being consistent across the board. The next one is, should we expect a change in the view mode for the ground vehicles, especially by taking into account the implementation of new, more modern vehicles? The answer is not planned for now. So they've talked about this in the past. They've talked about stuff like night vision, infrared vision, stuff like this, and to be honest, it would be lovely to see into the game, but the major issue with mechanics like that is there is a big problem with haves and have-nots. So right now in game, one of the biggest things at top tier that I think more people should use more is the laser rangefinder. A classic example of this, which is why one of the examples why I don't like the L44 compared to the A1A1, like I don't see them as exactly similar vehicles like a lot of people do, is the L44, the Premium 8.7, gets access to a laser rangefinder, where the normal Leopard A1A1 only gets access to a rangefinder. Now there's a big difference in these two things, and if you don't know the difference, then just, go and have a look or go test out a laser rangefinder and then go test out a normal rangefinder. Now, what happens with this is you have a strict line between these two vehicles that one is better than the other in specific senses. And what I feel like with night vision and with infrared vision and other styles of vision, you would have the same issue. You would have to put a clear line between vehicles that do have it and don't have it, and then the vehicles that don't have it are at a big disadvantage compared to the ones that do. We see this in a lot of other mechanics in the game, whether it be something simple as smoke, or even maybe ESS in some circumstances, or some of the more pronounced ones, air-to-air missiles right now is a big one, or stuff like even composite armor can be a big one as well. The other thing, supersonic nature of a jet. So do we want to add in more stuff which puts more barriers between specific vehicles of a similar BR, and will this be healthy in the long run for the game? Will it be more realistic and historical? Yes. Will it be healthy? Now that's obviously a bit subjective, and at least for right now, I think overall, for the top tier of the game, yes. Once we're getting into that 9.0 area, though, it's a little bit more muddling, isn't it? Because there's a lot of vehicles there which would not have these multi-site ideas and would be at a disadvantage compared to the rest because of these. So we're going to have to see. It seems like the system, they are definitely working on it. They've said in the past Q&As that they are working on different ways of seeing the game through sights. I'm not sure if they used night vision or infrared or something else, but I remember them talking about different layers that they were, where you'd have one layer of normalcy, and then you would click a button and it would put you on a different layer, kind of like how you would have to render in 3 different types of the same scenery over and over again. So that could be a little bit taxing. But yeah, I remember them talking about that a while ago. The next question is one of the biggest requests for ground forces for some time has been the implementation of regenerative steering. This affects many tanks as the game treats all of them as clutch-based, so lots of tanks, mostly post-war and higher tier, suffer huge losses of speed whilst turning. Can you tell us if you have plans to address this or need more information? The answer is yes, we're looking at it. Now, I've got a story to tell, and it won't take long, but it's about this. Now, there was an individual that hit me up on the Tech Hub server talking about how they wanted to talk about an issue. And generally, or most of the time, I'll be like, okay, where do you want to talk about this? I'll get into a voice chat, maybe we'll get some more people in. Let's have a discussion around it. If you hang out on the Tech Hub, you'll see on the voice channels, that's what I generally like to do. I kind of like to sit there, discuss what's going on, see what other people think, what is the best, what is the worst, and can we work out compromises between some of the problems, all of that stuff. I enjoy that. This individual would not shut up about the transmissions in War Thunder and how they are abhorrent to the game because they are not specific to each vehicle. Instead, what they are is a blanket, transmission across the board. And it was to do with this idea. The fact that the regenerative steering idea and also the clutch-based systems where they weren't put into the game in a realistic way. Instead, what was happening was they were put into a game just carte blanche across the board as the same. Now, when I say to an individual, I understand your point, I see all the research, yes, I think it should be changed. But when said individual bangs on about it for a month afterwards, every day, talking about the same topic, even though everybody agrees, yes, it should be changed, but we can't do anything about it, let's move on, it is incredibly annoying and incredibly frustrating because what it does is it makes you dislike that issue. It makes you want to not talk about that issue and not help it, which is why when an overburden of a certain issue can be a real problem to the brain. Because you can just think about if you work on a problem constantly for like hours and hours and hours, you're going to get jaded, you're going to get annoyed, and especially if you're not solving that problem. And on top of that, you do not have the tools to solve that problem. It can be incredibly annoying, incredibly stressful, and it flares tempers. Now imagine if you're doing that for a month, and it's not caused by you, it's caused by another individual. Now, you can see how annoying this would be. So, what I'm saying is, yes, when it comes to issues in games, especially War Thunder, there is always room to talk about them. We have to talk about them, and we have to discuss them, and we have to come up with solutions for them. But if you bang on about it 24/7, especially to a group of people who completely agree with you and would like to see exactly the same solution that you're talking about, it's going to wear those individuals down. And for me, this was one of those topics that happened, to me in War Thunder, so therefore I just kind of completely forgot about it, because I know the bug reports were put in, I know that Gaijin were looking into it, so therefore why should I, what's the point in discussing it from my point of view? Because all it's going to do is annoy me, because I'm just going to hear the same thing over and over again. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there kind of as a PSA when it comes to specific things and talking about them, because it can just be incredibly annoying. So regenerative steering, what is this? So here is a bug report, it's a pass for consideration suggestion by Teal Milan. Now, this is about regenerative steering. The best way to put it is in tanks, if you have a clutch-braked transmission, generally what happens is you will brake on one of the tracks and let the other one keep going, so then you would turn on that dime. Now, the problem with this, if you just let that do it naturally, you are losing a lot of energy into that brake on the right-hand side, which is not being used anywhere else. So you are changing a lot of kinetic energy into energy which is used in different ways, and what regenerative steering does is it takes that energy that used to be kinetic energy while moving the track and transfers it to the other track. So instead of just having a system where you brake one track and let the other one go at the same rate as before, you brake that track and the other track on the other side is going faster than it was before. So this pushes the vehicle around at a better rate while technically using very similar energy values, just transferring energy to different parts of the tank. So that's what regenerative steering is. It's really interesting. A lot of vehicles should be able to do this, and since we have access to stuff like dual drive and other things, hopefully regenerative steering at some point will be added to the game. The next question is, are there any plans for more obvious differences between tank RB and SB? For now, the only major difference is the location of the camera on the tank. The answer is, if you analyze it closely, you will see that the differences between two game modes are more significant. The absence of allied markers changes the gameplay in ground SB. So far, we don't have any plans to change the mechanics of these game modes. You also have different maps. You also have different ways that aircraft and helicopters, or just aircraft in general, I should say, airplanes and helicopters, how they are implemented in the game mode compared to realistic. You also have as they said, the markers stuff. You also just have different configurations of maps. So there is a lot of different stuff going on there. You also have designated lineups that you can take, specific vehicles that you can bring instead of the random matchmaking BR system elements. So there is a lot of cool stuff going on there, and I think those would all be seen as major differences. Different maps to me would be major differences, and I know some of them do cross over. Like I know Sinai is used for both, but think about the large version of Tunisia. You never see that in realistic, but you can see it quite a lot in simulator. The next question is, several updates ago, you tested drastic improvements to APCR and APDS on the dev server. However, these changes did not make it to the live server and have not been tested since. Can you tell us if you have to revisit these plans or improve the post-penetration effects of these rounds if not? The answer is yes. The conversation of the APCR HVAP penetration based on the formula is planned, but earlier iterations contained a number of inaccuracies. After they are fixed and the calculated values are close to the reference values, this mechanic will be tested again. APDS shells are also planned to be reworked, but will most likely be revised after APCR and HVAP. So the first thing to look forward to is APCR and HVAP changes, and then APDS. If you want to know what is being talked about here, so there was a dev server, I think it was for 187, where the Conqueror had over like 400 millimeters of pen on its APDS shell, and it was just tearing everybody apart, and it was incredibly fun. And a lot of people saw this as a bug, a lot of people saw this as a test, a lot of people weren't really sure what it was, and to be honest, I don't know really what it was either. But it seemed to affect a lot of the shells, so therefore that would point towards a change in the way that the formulae worked for these shells. So hopefully they get changed for the better. The issue I personally have is the issue with, of course, APCR and angled penetration, and also post-pen damage. But then again, that I think maybe as I've got better as a tanker, because I don't see myself as a good tanker. I don't think I am. I'm a good aircraft. I'm a good pilot in War Thunder. I'm not a good tanker. And as I've been getting better and working out where to shoot stuff, I haven't had too many issues with APDS, especially with stuff such as the British. The main issues I've been having recently is with APCR. Trying to spade something like an M48 when you get APCR stock, or the JPZ45 when you get APCR stock, is horrific. It's absolutely awful. And it would be much better if either two things happened. First of all, as they said, changing the penetration formula, and also mainly changing the angle issue with APCR. The other thing is giving, instead of modifications for shells, just outright giving you shells at the start of a stock grind for these vehicles, instead of being limited the ammo options you get. Instead, you are able to take a certain maximum amount of the high tier ammo. So let's say for the M48, for example, you can take a maximum of 5 HeatFS shells, but if you unlock the modification, the HeatFS modification, then you can take as many as you want, or as many can fit. So the idea is, you would still have some of the punishing power, even in a stock vehicle, and you wouldn't be at such a disadvantage, because one of the big things that has been addressed really well over the last year, with the lowering of a lot of modification prices and a lot of research prices, and also the difference between the rank 1 and rank 2, where you only have to research one rank 1 now to get to the rank 2 of modifications. All of these incredibly positive changes when it comes to grinding out and spading these vehicles. Why not, add this in as well, on top of all of them, just to get rid of that minor, not minor issue. I see it as a major issue. Some people see it as a minor one, but I think it's the last major issue when it comes to researching stock vehicles versus spaded. It's the one. There is other stuff as well. Smoke grenades is a big one, and then also, as we talked about, rangefinders, especially laser rangefinders. But the bigger one is the ammunition, especially when you compare, as I said, like an M60 or an M48 or a Jagdpanzer 4.5 or anything. The Rise is a good example of this. Even stuff like the STB, which is a great vehicle, but its APDS is nowhere near the level of its HeatFS. So yeah, I personally would like to see that implemented to fix that issue, and if not, well, let's just get a different stock round in instead. Moving on to aircraft, there are a lot of questions to implement the Soviet giant aircraft, the K-7. Is it in the plans? The answer is, it's a very specific vehicle. Its appearance in the research tree is not planned, not only because of its dubious efficiency, God, yeah, you could put it like that, but also because of its very mediocre flight characteristics. So, dubious efficiency is putting it mildly. So if you don't know what the K-7 is, it's this monstrosity. It's a big one, it's 6 engines, and as you can see, it's more of a house house on propellers. It was built from 1931 to 33. It could carry, in its transport configuration, it could carry 120 passengers. If it was going to be used as a paratrooper plane, it could carry 112 paratroopers, but understand that this only flew in its civil transport configuration, which is the one that you see before you. I believe it did around 7 or 8 flights, and then unfortunately one of the bottom bits here, where the wheels are, unfortunately it had a malfunction, so it crashed when it came down. There was only one of these built. It did fly though, there are pictures of it, we do have all the specs on it, and what is interesting is the Soviets being the Soviets, even though this thing was at least only tested in its civil configuration, they planned a bomber configuration. And the bomber configuration was supposed to have 8 20mm cannons, 8 7.62mm machine guns, and 9,600 kilos worth of bombs. Now this thing was not exactly a great airworthy machine. On its first test flight, the airframe actually resonated with the engine frequency. Now, if you want to know what that would do to an aircraft, so if something resonates, basically the frequencies match up and the increased vibration becomes double-fold. So have you ever seen the video of the bridge, which is flopping? Like it's going like a wave through the air, and then it breaks apart. This is because the wind basically hit the resonance of the building materials of the bridge. I believe it might have been steel or something like this, and this made the whole bridge, this massive structure, wobble, and obviously increase in vibration, and eventually create a wave. Now, imagine if you're doing that, but you're in this huge, humongous plane on the first flight, and everything is shaking, trying to massacre itself. That's basically what happened here with this machine, which is why Gaijins say it has dubious efficiency, because and also at the time, one of the big problems you have in the 30s with a lot of these vehicles, and especially this one as well, because it was so large, just like stuff like the TB3s, it was seen as a big political good step. It was seen as, look at the power of the Soviet Union, and therefore it will have been used in stuff like propaganda, it will have been used to try and promote stuff, and therefore it's going to be at least a little bit harder to push the propaganda side away from the actual specs of the vehicle. I'd just like to thank B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, John Reinman, Leonard Rudnick, Martinez, Matati, Moxie, Nick Graham, Alobrilo, Super Cacti, Elove Goats, and Seductive Trashcan for supporting the channel.